Maseches Gittin Daf Mem Zayin contains one short Mishnah. The beginning of the Daf until the Mishnah is discussing our last people who sell themselves to Evdei Kechavim. We'll have two stories about people who are sold to cannibals. Then we get to our Mishnah, which discusses if somebody sells property, does he need to buy the Bikurim back from the Evdei Kechavim? The Gemara will discuss at length the topic of whether possession of an akum of land in Eretz Yisrael takes off the halachos, the mitzvos of Eretz Yisrael that apply to that land. We'll bring a number of proofs, including from our Mishnah. So let's begin. So again, the Gemara is discussing an incident where the last two lines on Daf Mem Vav, the Gemara says it was a person who sold himself to Ludaim. And it turns out that the Ludaim people were cannibals, and they were planning to eat him. So he came to Rav Ami, and he said, "Can you redeem me from these people?" So Rav Ami said, "We could learn," he didn't say to him, but he thought, and he discussed with others, we could learn the halacha here from the Mishnah. Our most recent Mishnah said that although we don't redeem somebody who sells himself multiple times, after the death of their father, we do redeem the children. And that's because we're afraid that the children are going to turn into Evdei Kechavim if they stay in the house of the Evdei Kechavim. As long as their father's alive, we're not worried about that because he's going to keep an eye on them. But once that's not going to happen, we redeem them to save them from that fate. So certainly we should save this guy from his fate of being killed by these cannibals. So the Gemara says, but they said to him, but this guy is not a regular guy, this guy is Yisrael Mumar. The halacha of a Yisrael Mumar, someone who violates the Torah on purpose, is that we allow him to descend into the well, and we don't take him out. We don't kill him, but we definitely don't save him. So the Gemara, so they said to him, so that is the Rabbanan said to Rav Ami, how could you save him if he's Yisrael Mumar? How do you know he's Yisrael Mumar? He said, we saw him eating nevelis and treifus, non-kosher food. So he said, well, maybe he's not a mumar lahachas, maybe he's a mumar l'ti'avin. Maybe he did that because he had a strong desire for it. That doesn't mean that he's trying to anger Kadosh Baruch Hu. He's just a person struck with desires. We don't punish people like that in such a way. So he said, no, it was a situation where there was where there was kosher or non-kosher food in front of him, and he purposely went and ate the non-kosher food. Someone who, like, that is intending to purposely spite Kadosh Baruch Hu. The halacha there is you don't save something like that. So Rav Ami went back to the guy and he said, sorry, the others don't allow me to redeem you, so I can't redeem you. Second story is with Rish Lakish. Rish Lakish, before he was a Talmid Chacham, was a bandit. This story possibly took place during that time. And he heard about these Ludaim, apparently wanted to do something about it, so he sold himself to the Ludaim, and now they were capturing him. They were holding on to him. Remember, these are cannibals. But he took with him a sack with a big rock in it, a big round rock. Gemara calls it like a sack with a skull in it. And he understood that on the last day of the life of their captive, they would grant him whatever wish he wanted. The Gemara has an expression to explain that deleichol admei, which machokes, if that means that his blood should be sweeter when they eat it because he feels good, or that they're looking for an atonement for the fact that they're going to kill him. But either way, the day came and he knew that it was going to be his last day because they said, okay, what do you want? What would you like us to do for you? So he said, I want you all to tie yourselves up and lie down here in rows on the floor. So they tied themselves up, lie down, and he took his sack with the rock in it and he gave a hard swing and whacked them each on the head. He said to them, as part of the deal, I want to have a whack and a half for each of you. So he whacked them on the head, and that was it. He killed them. So there was one that wasn't killed. He was kind of stunned, and then he was gnashing his teeth at him. And Rish Lakish said, oh, you're laughing at me? I still owe you half a whack. And he whacked him his other half a whack, and that was what finished him off. So in this way, he killed all these Ludaim. That was the end of them. The Gemara, as an aside, discusses the rest of Rish Lakish's habits. So the Gemara says that Rish Lakish would eat and drink a lot. Again, this was apparently in his time as the bandit. And his daughter said to him at some point, don't you want something to lie on? And he said, I have my stomach, I could lie on my stomach. Apparently he was very fat. And then it says that when he died, all that was left over was a pinch of turmeric, a kavod d'merika. But he called about himself, he said that he left to others his strength, meaning he gave over a lot for others. All right, now we begin the Mishnah. Next Mishnah. This Mishnah discusses somebody who sells his land in Eretz Yisrael to Akum. So the Mishnah says he has to purchase the bikurim, that is the first fruits that grow every year. He has to buy those bikurim so that he could do the mitzvah of bikurim with them. He has to bring them to Yerushalayim and take them, follow the halachos of bikurim. Now, what's the reason? So the Mishnah says, again, as we've seen many times, as a way of fixing the world. What's the fixing the world here? So the Gemara will explain that we don't want people selling their land to Akum in order to avoid having to bring bikurim. And people, it costs them to have to go take it to Yerushalayim. So maybe they'll say, you know what, I'll sell my land to an Akum, and that's it. I won't have to bring bikurim any longer. In order to avoid that from happening, even if you do sell your land, you have to, not only do you have to bring bikurim, now you have to go buy it from the new owner, from the Akum, and he may charge you anything he wants for it, and you got to bring bikurim from there. Now, this touches on the topic of the land which belongs to the Akum. Does it still have the mitzvah of Eretz Yisrael, and does it still have Kedushas Haaretz? One of those mitzvahs is Bikurim, another one is Meiser. This seems to indicate that there is a mitzvah of Bikurim here. The Gemara introduces the machlokes on the topic of, is there Kedushas Eretz Yisrael on land in Eretz Yisrael that belongs to an Akum or not? And this will end up being one of, it's not the first proof, but it'll be one of the proofs. We'll go through a number of proofs on the topic, and then we'll get to another related machlokes. So the Gemara first introduces the machlokes, and where it says, Rabbah holds that even if a Akum owns land in Eretz Yisrael, does not take the Kedusha off, and there's still a mitzvah of Meiser, specifically refers to Meiser. Meiser still has to be brought from it. Now, obviously, the guy doesn't have to bring Meiser. He's only mitzvah in the 7 mitzvahs of Bnei Noach. However, if a Yisrael buys produce from him, that Yisrael has to take Meiser off it, because the Meiser wasn't taken by the guy. Now, what is his source? So he says, the pasuk says, Ki li haaretz, that the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael goes to me, goes to Kadosh Baruch Hu, even if it belongs to a guy, even if the land belongs to the guy, being part of Eretz Yisrael still makes it have Kedusha. Now, says Rabbah, however, if he wants to mess up the land, if he wants to do anything with it, he wants to make it filled with holes or wells, to ruin the actual development of the land, that he is allowed to do, because he owns it, like it says, the land is given to people to that extent. So if the guy owns it, he can do whatever he wants with it, but the Kedusha doesn't come off. That's Rabbah. Now, Rav Elazar, the Amira, says the opposite. Even though he says there is kinyan in Eretz Yisrael to take the mitzvah of Meiser off. That is, there's no mitzvah of Meiser on land that is owned by an Akum. And how do you see that? Because it says Digancha. The mitzvah of Meiser says it should be your grain. That means grain that belongs to you, not grain that belongs to an Avik Yechavim. But they cannot ruin the land. They cannot dig holes, wells, or caves in it, because it says La Hashem Haaretz. The land belongs to Hashem. Now, what is this machlokes over? So let's focus on, is there a mitzvah of Meiser on land which belongs to a guy or not? So Gemara says it's over the word of Digancha. One says it means your grain. That means the grain has to be grain and grown, belonging to you. If it's grow on land belonging to an Avik Yechavim, there's no mitzvah. The other one says, no, you read it Diguncha. Diguncha doesn't mean your grain. Digun is a verb which means to heap up the grain in the granary and process it, make it to a heap and smooth it out. So it has to be that digun is done by you, not by an Avik Yechavim. But if the land belonged to an Avik Yechavim and he sold it to you, and you did the digun, then it will be chayev, just like everything else. The fact that it belongs to an Akum doesn't take the land off. Now the Gemara begins bringing proofs on the subject. So the first one is brought by Rabbah himself, and it concerns the concept of leket, shikha, and peah. So all produce grown in Eretz Yisrael, grain has a halacha of leket, shikha, and peah. Anything that was dropped or left behind in the corner of the field must be left for the poor people. And the halacha of leket, shikha, and peah is that it's an obligation for a Jew who owns it, and the leket and shikha peah is not chayv in meiser. There's no mitzvah in meiser on that. Now, you could also be mafkir your things for the poor, and something which you're mafkir is also not chayv in meiser, but it's different. It's not a din of leket, shikha, and peah. It's a din in the fact that you were mafkir. You made it ownerless. You made it hefker. So the Mishnah discusses if a guy if you have leket, shikha, and peah of a guy. So what's the halacha? So the Mishnah says, if you leket, shikha, and peah of a guy, it's still chayv in meiser. I mean, it doesn't count as real leket, shikha, and peah. He's still chayv in meiser. If, however, he's mafker, so mafker, okay, hefker is hefker. But if he wants to make it leket, shikha, and peah, that's no good. So the Gemara says, all right, what are we talking about? When we say the leket, shikha, and peah of a guy, what does that mean? Does it mean that the guy owned the field and he put out leket shechampeya, or does it mean that the guy collected leket shechampeya from a Jew's field? So let's consider the two options. So the Gemara says, if you want to say that the Yisrael owned the field and the guy picked it up and collected the leket and the shikha and the peya, so then what do I mean when we say only if you're mafkir it? If he makes it hefker, then it's putter from Meiser. What do you mean? It was already hefker. It was leket shikha peya of the Yisrael. The Yisrael was mafkir it. It's putter from that moment. What else has to happen? So it doesn't make sense for us to say that it's chayv in Meiser until he's mafkir. So it must be that the guy owned the land and the guy put it out. So now we say if the guy puts it out to be leket shikha peya, it's nothing. It doesn't count as real leket shikha and peya, and therefore it's chayv in Meiser. Only if he's mafkir and becomes hefker as putter because of the fact that it's hefker. So you see clearly from this, we're talking about land that belongs to a guy in Eretz Yisrael, and it's chayv in Meiser. Unless he's mafkir it's chayv in Meiser. The point is that there's no mitzvah leket shikha peya. Fine, but what we were saying is that it's chayv in Meiser. If a Jew goes and buys it, he has to take Meiser from us. Obviously, Meiser does apply to land which is owned by a Jew in Eretz Yisrael. So the Gemara says, no, maybe really learn wrong shot here. Really, we're referring to where the land belonged to a Yisrael and was collected by an Avid Kechavim. Ayas is hefka already. So that is not fully true. He was only mafkirt for a Yisrael. He wasn't mafkirt for in Oivik Chavim, wasn't mafkirt for an Akam. So therefore, there's no hefker on it, and that's why it's chayv and meiser unless he's mafkirt again, because there wasn't a real hefker situation here. Okay, and it wasn't hefker because it was a guy who collected it. Okay, now the Gemara brings another proof. We have a Mishnah that says Yisrael who purchases a field from an Oivik Chavim before the grain growing in the field has grown 1/3, and then he sells it after it's grown 1/3. That means that the Yisrael only owned this field in the middle of its growth, but he owned it at the time that it passed 1/3 growth. Now the halacha is the moment at which it grows 1/3 is the moment at which it becomes chayv and meiser. So the halacha here is that since at the moment at which it grew 1/3, it was owned by Yisrael, it's chayev in meiser. So you see, it's only because Yisrael owned it at that time that it's chayev in meiser. But if a guy would owe it at that time, it would not be chayev in meiser. Clearly, the kinyan of the akam on the land means that there will not be a chayev meiser. Someone says here we're talking about something else. Here we're talking about in Syria. The halacha of Syria is that it was conquered by David HaMelech, not by Klal Yisrael. This Tana holds that that's what's called kibush yachad, individual conquest. It holds that it's not called conquest, therefore it does not have Kedushas Eretz Yisrael, Mid'Oraisa. There is, however, Kedushas Eretz Yisrael, Midrabanan. And therefore, that's why the kinyan of the Akam takes off the mitzvah of Meiser. So this is really an answer which we're going to be able to use at any time. Anytime we can prove that the guy's possession is not chayiv in Meiser or Kedushas Arts, we're able to say, no, that's talking about Syria, where it's only the Rabbanon, and therefore there is no, but the rest of Eretz Yisrael, there will be a full chayiv Meiser and all mitzvahs of Tluyas Ba'aretz. Okay, the Gemara brings another proof. It says Yisrael and an Oivik Chavim that purchased a land in partnership. They each own half. They share the ownership of this land. So what happens with the grain that's growing on the land? So there's a machlokes between Rebbe and Rosh Shimon ben Gamliel how the partnership is set up on the grain. So Rebbe says every single kernel of grain here is owned half and half by each of them. And therefore every single kernel of grain is both tevel and chulin, which means grain which is not chayv and truma and meiser, mixed together. Therefore, you cannot take from this grain truma or meiser on any other grain which is fully chayiv, because this grain is half putter. And you can't take on any other one on this because this grain is also half putter and the other one is fully chayiv. The only thing which you can take truma and meiser from is this grain on this grain. Now Shmuel Gamliel says no, you do the partnership differently. After they divided and they split it, you say whichever one the Yisrael got is the one that was always his, and that was the one which is fully chayiv in truma and meiser, and the one which the Akam got was his, was always chulin. And that is using the concept of breira. So what really is happening here is Rebbe says there's no breira, it's all mixed together. And Shimon ben Gamliel saying no, there is breira, and we say we revealed afterwards who owned it, who owned what the entire time. So says the Gemara, is over breira. But everybody agrees that the part which belongs to the guy does not have any chiyuv of truma and meiser. So you see that the kinyan of the guy takes off the mitzvah. So the Gemara says, not a kasha. Here is also talking about Syria. And again, he holds that the conquest of Syria does not make a chiyuv truma and meiser, d'oraisa. It's only d'rabbanan. Therefore, you could take it off if a guy owns it. Okay, says of Chibarav, and I have another proof. And the Mishnah says that somebody sells his field to it. This is our Mishnah that we just learned before. It says that somebody who sells his field to an Chavim, and he has to buy the bikurim back from him because of tikkun ha'olam. So the implication is clearly that midaraisa he doesn't have to buy it back. Midaraisa, there is no chiv bikurim. It's only tikkun ha'olam that says it. So you see that the mitzvah of bikurim was taken off when the guy took ownership. There is no mitzvah of land which belongs to the guy. So the Gemara answers no. What actually happened is that there was two changes here. Midaraisa, the halacha was that they were chayiv to bring the bikurim. You had to buy the bikurim and bring it because it was still chayiv, even though it belonged to the guy. What's happening is when people saw that, they were assuming, so you see, the land stays in its kedusha, so what's the problem if I sell it to a guy? So they were often selling their land to the guy. The Gemara didn't want that to happen. So therefore they made gzeira that people should not bring their bikurim. That way they wouldn't want to sell it. They would understand that they are taking its kedusha off. However, then what's happening was that many people were selling it anyway, and it was staying by the goyim, and people didn't care. So they put it back in the din Torah that was before, that you do have to bring the bikurim, but really it's dairaisa. This concludes the Gemara's discussion of this machlokes. I'm now going to another machlokes about bikurim. So bikurim, when one brings bikurim, he would have to read the parsha, which it says in Parshas Kisavai, Parshas Mikra Bikurim, and he would have to say what it says. And one of the things that it says there is Mereshis that I brought, Mereshis Priyodama Shanasata Li, the land which you gave to me. You can only do that if you own the land. It wasn't given to you if you don't own it. So my question now is, what happens if somebody doesn't own the body of the land, but he owns the fruits of the land? He bought the land from someone that you're going to own the land. You still keep the ownership of the land. However, all the fruits belong to me, and I get to collect the fruits. So is that considered to be like he owns the land and he can say the parsha and therefore he could bring the bikurim? Or do we say, no, he doesn't own the land, he only owns the fruits? The Gemara says, Rav Yechanan said he brings bikurim and he reads the parsha. Reish Lakish said he has to bring bikurim, but he does not read the parsha. So this machlokes clearly is about the question of owning fruits. Is that called like owning the land or not? And Rav Yechanan says you have to read the parsha because owning fruits is like owning land. And Reish Lakish says, no, you don't read the parsha because you can't say Hashem Nasatli. Owning fruits is not like owning land. So says the Gemara, okay, let's bring some proof. So Rav Yechanan brought a proof to Reish Lakish. It says when he, in the psukim that he brings, it says v'samachtu b'chalatei v'shem nasan olcha Hashem lekecha u'veisecha. It gave you and your house. So your household refers to your wife. So this teaches that a person can bring bikurim that belong to his wife. If his wife owns land, he could bring his wife's bikurim, and he could read the parsha. He could say, the land which he gave to me. Now, what does a person own in his wife's land? She owns the land, and he only gets to use the fruit. That's halach of nechsei malug. So you see exactly what I'm telling you, that where you own the fruits, it's considered to be yours, and you could say the parsha. So Reish Lakish said, no, that's different, because you have a specific limud. It says ulevei secha. If not for the limud, the standard halacha would be that generally you can't. It's only because it's your wife that you have this specific halacha. Now there are those who have this exact exchange reversed. That's Reish Lakish brought the proof to Rav Yechanan that the limud is only because it says ulevei secha, but otherwise you would never be able to bring land which you own the fruits and not the body of the land itself. You would not be able to bring bikurim. You would be able to bring it, but you wouldn't be able to read the parsha because you couldn't say it's mine. And Reish Lakish says, no, I'm learning out of this case. Specifically, I'm applying it to everywhere else. It's not specific here because it's your wife. In any situation where you own fruits of the land, not the land itself, you could still bring it just like you could here. This is the source where you learn to everywhere else. The Gemara has another proof. We have a mission that says if somebody was coming along the way and he has his wife's fruits, his wife's bikurim with him, and then he heard that his wife had died. So the halacha is he could bring the bikurim and read the parsha. So the implication is it's only because she died and he inherited her property and now it's his. That's why he could bring bikurim. However, if not, then he can't, and that must be because he doesn't own the land; he only owns the fruits. And you see that owning the land is not considered to be owning the fruits is not considered to be like owning the land. Obviously, this is not going to fit with the last limud we made, but the Gemara doesn't say that. The Gemara says no, even though she didn't die, he could still bring and read it. The chiddush here is that even though she died, he could. Now, you might think that if she died, then he can't. What's the reason? Because of a special gzeira. Gzeira that we find by Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina. Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina says that if somebody picked his grapes, that's bikurim, and they send them with a shliach, and the shliach died along the way, and the owner comes and takes it the rest of the way himself. So the halacha is that he doesn't read the parsha, because it says that the one who's bringing it and actually takes it to the end has to be the same person. If it's split, someone brings it part of the way and someone brings it the rest of the way, you can't say the parsha. So you may think that the similar thing applies here, because on the way it belonged to his wife, and then when he got there, it belonged to him. So this is coming to teach me, no, you don't have that, and you could still bring it even though his wife died along the way. Now, the Gemara is going to show that the same achlokes applies by Yovel. At the time when Yovel existed, you never bought land to own the land itself. You only bought land for the usage because it was going to go back at Yovel time. So Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish had the same achlokes there. And the Gemara says it's an extra chiddush that machlokes applies there because there is a sense in which you own the land more, but the same machlokes applies there, whether or not you could say the whole parsha of